Anytime somebody is carrying a personal secret, not like this is what I'm getting my husband for Christmas type secret, right? But a personal fear-based secret, I will never tell anybody this thing. They're holding a part of themselves back.
If you've been married 20 years and you've been dealing with porn for that whole time, and now you've been 3 years sober, that's great. I applaud you. But now what does it look like to be married? You guys need to learn how to be married again, and maybe for the first time.
Welcome to Saints and Sexuality, a podcast by FirstLight Ministries for educating ministry leaders and strugglers about the causes, aftermath, and treatment of addictive sexual behaviors. FirstLight is a St. Louis-based ministry that is dedicated to helping men, women, and betrayed spouses find freedom from the harm of sexual sin. Integration is a concept in counseling where every aspect of a person works together to form a balanced self. But when somebody struggles with sexual addiction, it doesn't just impact behavior. It fragments this sense of self. People who struggle often find their emotions, thoughts, values, and actions to be disconnected, even at odds. For example, somebody might lie to cover up their porn usage, putting their values at odds with their actions. Somebody might use an affair to escape from reality, disconnecting their thoughts from their emotions. And especially in the church, somebody might have a strong sense of faith, but live a life hiding because they feel like they don't measure up. This is called disintegration. When somebody is disintegrated, they often experience a deep sense of shame, numbness, self-loathing, and an unbearable tension between the person they see in the mirror and the person they wish they could be. In today's episode, FirstLight counselors Shari Montague and Matthew Friesen explore how disintegration affects strugglers and how breaking free from sexual addiction involves more than just stopping behaviors. It's about learning how to live as a truly whole person. Let's get started.
Yeah, so one of the things we see in addiction in general, and again, it kind of goes back to the secrecy element, but it's just as another check on what is happening in your heart, is the idea of being disintegrated. So folks who struggle with addictive behaviors in general, or who have an addiction, are disintegrated, which means that they have parts of their lives that are secret, that are cut off. Maybe that's because they're using alcohol to soothe emotions. And so they aren't feeling fully what they ought to be feeling or what they are intended to be feeling. Or maybe that's because they have a whole secret life, or, the worst case scenario is the double life that we do sometimes see in sex addiction in particular. I think we see that the most clearly. But that sense of disintegration, that sense of compartmentalization, being able to, this part of my life is in this box, and I don't think about this part of my life except when I'm doing that part of my life, and I hold the other parts of my life over here, or even multiple parts of my life in different boxes that never touch each other. And so, we see a great deal of compartmentalization with sex addiction. Anytime somebody is carrying a big secret, particularly a big personal secret, not like this is what I'm getting my husband for Christmas type secret, right? But a personal, a fear-based secret, I will never tell anybody this thing. They're holding a part of themselves back. Yeah. When you do that, you can't fully show up for any part of your life. Right. Often it creates a lot of anger and frustration. So I hear a lot from the spouses, actually more often, about how angry their wives are, or their husbands are, and how irritable they've been, and they just seem off. That's usually a really good indication to me from the wife's perspective that there is disintegration happening and the husband doesn't know what to do with it. Yes. The wife doesn't know what to do with it either because she doesn't know the source. Yeah. She just knows something's wrong. But for the man in this scenario, we can see that like you're breaking apart at the seams. What we want to see them do, and what we try to walk them through both in therapy and in the groups, is to bring them into integration. So to do that, you have to stop the behavior. You have to stop the addiction. You have to be able to be fully aware of what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Those pieces have to come up. So I will often tell men and women when they're in this process, it's a little bit like being out in the cold, and the addiction has kept you out in the cold, and it's freezing.
That's good.
So people in the South may not fully understand this analogy, but I grew up in the North. And there were days that you could only be outside for 20 minutes because it got so cold. And then your fingers would go numb and your toes would go numb. And then maybe your ankles and your...
It impacts how you function.
It impacts how you function. Then you come inside. And what you're doing right now in therapy and in FirstLight is you're coming inside. And it is painful. If anybody has done that, you will know. It is very painful to come inside and let your hands warm up.
The warmth isn't comforting
It
at
is
first.
not comforting at first. It hurts. And especially if you have to do it quickly.
Yeah.
So you put them under warm water. Not even hot water, just warm water. It can feel like your hands are on fire.
Yeah.
But if you are near frostbite, that's what you need to do. You actually need to warm up very quickly so that you don't lose the complete use of those limbs.
Yeah.
And so that's an analogy I like to use because I think it conveys the sense of, yeah, this is uncomfortable right now, but it actually is saving the use of your limbs. It's saving the use of your ability to be emotional and connected and becoming an integrated person. So that's our business. That's what we want for folks is to become integrated, to know their emotions, to be able to express their emotions, to not be numbing them through sex or sexual behaviors, but to be aware of, able to express, not hiding, and therefore being fully present in the relationships in their lives, both with themselves and with people and with God. It's not just with other people that we're talking about. It's the relationship with themselves. Because ultimately, disintegration is a broken relationship with yourself.
The impact of dysregulation is something that's so important with clients because I don't think they see how deep it goes until it hits them in the face. And I wish that was something that if I could say anything to men out there who are waiting until it gets out of hand or waiting until they can do it on their own, is this disintegration is impacting you more than you think. Because it's what you said, that keeping part of yourself secret, compartmentalizing, separating yourself is more painful than you think. It's damaging and sometimes can be not beyond repair, but a lot of work to get back because you're growing separately from your spouse. You're growing separately from those relationships. And there's a whole part of yourself that you haven't addressed. You haven't, hasn't seen
that
the
you
sunlight.
don't even know.
Yes. That you haven't healed. And you could be, if it's childhood trauma, you could be stuck in that trauma cycle. And by keeping it secret, you're going to remain there and you're going to respond poorly to things over and over. And as much as you want to change a certain behavior, it's all linked together. And that integration becomes so damaging because we're unable to confess, we're unable to repent, we're unable to change because it's so hidden, like you said, even from ourselves sometimes. But then we see a lot of times in the definition of, infidelity, a lot of times we draw the line at, inappropriate sexual behavior as infidelity, but it goes so much deeper in that into emotional infidelity. Just getting something from someone else that you're not getting from your spouse, for the most part, is unhealthy. Ski lessons. If your wife doesn't know how to ski, you can get that from someone else. But this idea that I'm getting something that I should be getting from my spouse, but I'm getting it from somebody else, becomes this open door of just hiddenness. That this is the reason why. This is the excuse. This is the justification you mentioned earlier. And so we begin to separate, and that little piece just gets so big, and it becomes that wedge. I hear spouses so often say, I just wish he would open up. I just wish he would tell me how he's feeling. I just wish he could tell me about his day, or he's, but men who sit with this, sit on the edge, of the knife, is I'm constantly waiting to be found out, but also angry that you're treating me like I've already been found out. Because they're hiding that to themselves. And it's so hard to go about a normal day on that edge.
Sure does.
When are you going to find out? What are you going to think about me?
Yeah. And I think sometimes, when we're hiding stuff from others, we often put on them the the sense that they're doing something wrong. So, well, if I'm hiding this, they must be hiding something.
Yeah.
It's rarely that clear in our heads, I think, but that's sort of the attitude we have. And so we treat our spouse with suspicion. We might be more irritable with them because we think they're doing something that we don't want them to be doing, that we're doing instead. So you
But
also
we're not going to address it in a healthy way because we're not having a conversation.
We're not going to have that conversation.
Yeah.
So you also have those aspects of that, again, that irritability and that sense of like anger. And I think for a lot of our couples, that anger is one of the first indications for the wife about that something is going on.
Yeah.
She doesn't necessarily know where it's coming from, but there's just this something's off. And he's just more irritable. He's more frustrated. He's snappy. Or it's gotten worse.
This little thing used to be there, but now it's constant.
It's amplified. Yeah, I think it's an important part to see how much that alone, we think we're doing a good job hiding, and in reality, you're not. You're not hiding it very well. She doesn't know what is going on, but she does know something is going on.
You're not as good as you think.
Right.
I think that's part of the healing process. A lot of times we'll see with couples and addicts to say, that healing is never doing this again or never struggling anymore. And we've seen in our community, we'll hear in check-in meetings or in different testimonies where there may be times where we have regression or we have slip-ups or we fall back into it. And even the men who don't, there's still temptation, there's still struggles. And so what we do to combat that is we're trying to open up the lines of communication, is that you're no longer doing this alone, that you have a struggle, you have this incompetence, you have this brokenness in you, and you're inviting your spouse in to share it with you instead of keeping it from them. And so, having conversations to teach men how to have those really hard conversations, they don't really get easy, but just being able to invite your spouse in to say, I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling disconnected, or I wish we could do something together, or I'm feeling unloved, or I wish I could love you this way. And having those hard conversations, but having them still opens up the lines and allows us to kind of step out from the shadows, step out from that secrecy, undo the compartmentalization. And that's the step back into the integration.
It is. Sometimes that can't be done with a spouse right away.
Right. It's done safely.
And that's why, again, you have FirstLight community and your therapist, because those are people that you can talk to when your spouse isn't ready. And I see that on both sides. Yes. Sometimes wives are in a place where they want to start talking and, want to start understanding more, and husbands are not ready to have the conversation, or they're unwilling to share what's going on in their own hearts or what or the like. And the same is true with husbands. Sometimes the wives are not ready to have the conversation, especially initially. So if she's just found out the shock, right. If she's just found out about what's going on, she's not going to care, frankly, if you are feeling disconnected. She's going to be pretty angry. And so just trying to figure out her own sense of what needs to happen. And so that's, again, why we have community for both husbands and wives.
It's huge.
Because sometimes their spouse is not ready, but there are other people who can, in healthy ways, be a surrogate for that. Again, not the kind this is something I should be getting from my wife or my husband that I'm going to do with this coworker, but the kind of healthy community that says, you need other people besides your spouse. And sometimes spouses are not able, for whatever reason, to meet your need, nor should they always be expected to. And so it's okay if, and good and right if you talk to your therapist about this issue, or you talk to your community group or your men's group, other people that are appropriate in your life to be talking.
Man, we can so easily see the damage of the absence of community in those relationships. It's the same thing coming out from the cold, coming in from the cold is I've never had anybody to talk to. And that same invitation is totally there for the spouse as well. Like you just as much, maybe if not more, need that therapist, need that pastor, need that confidant, and that group of women to come alongside you and say, it's hard and we'll take the next step. And that, that's the role that the therapist can play such an integral part, is saying, I think now is a good time to take that next step, or I think we need to hold off until
Right.
you're in a better place.
Right.
We see that with, our structured full disclosures and taking those steps is having those scaffoldings around them to make sure that before we take this next step, here's what you need to know, or here's how we can care for you best. And having someone who's on your team who's not in it with you, who hasn't experienced that same pain, saying, I can walk with you in this.
I think also that the therapist, when you're working within the FirstLight community as a whole, so you have the community, you have your men's group or your women's group or spouse care group or your men's sexual integrity group, then so we kind of have a path through those things, right? And I see therapy, if you're working with a FirstLight therapist, then the therapist is able to, we are able to see what it is that you need and help guide you through the pieces that we know are coming or the pieces that we know should happen, but we can help you guide you on a more individual level to the piece, to the timing, because it's not a one size fits all. Recovery from anything is never one size fits all. And I think we try to make it that way globally. That's a global thought, not a FirstLight thought.
It's the personalized attunement.
Right. And so FirstLight as a whole tries to, here's the path that we see everybody needs to go through. And here are the steps that we know you need to take. And here you go. And then we do offer even the spouse care director and the men's director offer some of that personalization, but having a FirstLight therapist adds to that experience to be able to say, we know the path you're going on. We know where you are. We know where you're going.
We know what's coming.
We know what needs to happen in between, and we can help guide you as far as structured full disclosure would be a really good example of that. Not everybody is ready to do structured full disclosure immediately or when they're encouraged to do it in the curriculum or in the groups. But we're able as the counselors to say, yes, that's important. You're not ready. Here's why. And let me help guide you to the place of being ready, or help guide this process in a way that's helpful for you. So it's also an important part of, again, we talk about the three-legged stool sometimes, or the different supports that you have, community. It looks a little different for the men's community, but generally speaking, I think community, I think therapist, and I think one-on-one or small group work. Those are the pieces that are necessary to help with recovery. And so therapy is a big piece of that. Again, because we're uncovering and working out the things that you're doing in your group that help you unpack where did this come from? Why am I doing this? This is something you're saying with Paul, I don't understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. But I don't understand why I do it. So the therapy is the place. Of course, all the pieces will inform that, but the therapy is where we really get to focus individually on what it is that each person is struggling with and what it is underneath that I don't understand what I do.
And oftentimes we don't have all the answers that they necessarily want, or maybe that they're not even ready for. I love the work I get to do because I feel like I get to zoom out and look at the roadmap and say, I know your story is individual to you and personal to you, but here's some hurdles that may be coming. And being able to be an advocate for that client and say, you may not experience this, but I want you to know that we've seen this happen in the past, or this can happen at times. Looking at the severity of addiction or the pattern of relationships or the pattern of how things come out in marriages. We get people who are not even married and they're alone in this struggle, super isolated. They're feeling lonely, all the way to people who have been married 40, 50 years and their things are coming out. And so this idea to say, hey, let's look ahead and I can maybe save you some pain, or I can prepare you for some of this work that's ahead. Maybe we avoid the hurdles, or maybe we just tackle them together. And I think that part of that therapeutic relationship is so huge, just to say that there's still hard work ahead. There's still a lot of responsibility that you're going to bear, but you don't have to bear it alone. And having that integral part of the community, the men and the women who are going to walk with you and support you, but having that therapeutic relationship just to say, hey, I've seen this before. This might be coming, heads up. And if it comes, great, I'm here for you. And if it doesn't come, great, we avoided it, those pitfalls. And so I think it's so great when men can kind of surrender themselves to the process and kind of come in with an ideal and a hope. We talk about hope a lot in session, what place it has, what role it plays. And that's a hard struggle, but just coming into the group, it's like coming to that warmth. It may be pain,
right?
But there is hope, and it, the pain's not over, the struggle's not over, and the work's not over. But to even ignite a little bit of hope is huge.
Yep, exactly. I think one of the hard things too when we're working with folks who are just coming in is often they're looking for a quick fix.
Yes.
And I think this is true. This is also like, we all kind of want that to happen. We all want this to be an easy thing, or a thing that could just be fixed in a couple months. I'll just stop, or here's a book, just stop, or go to this accountability group. Again, all those things can be helpful at points, but when we have somebody come in, we usually tell them this is a 3 to 5 year process. This is not a quick fix. You are not going to be back out into the, doing everything you want to be doing and not dealing with any of the addiction or any of the struggles in 6 months.
This
in fact,
is a broken
6 months,
back, not a sprained ankle.
Right, exactly. 6 months is like, that's when you really get real about
it. Starts.
Right. So often that's a balancing act. I don't always like to tell people that first off, because it can be kind of scary to hear that. Daunting. But at some point, I think it's important for them to hear. And I think as a community, it's important for us to hear, because it again gives a sense of the gravity. This isn't just a 6 month stop it type thing. This is years of work. This is years of sanctification at work and striving for the sense of healing is not easy. We understand when we talk about folks who are in AA that they're an alcoholic, but they're 30 years sober. I think we could have some of that same language around sex addiction. It would be helpful for us to understand that sometimes we can be really good and done with it, but sometimes we can't be. And that's a lifelong process, just like sanctification is a lifelong process.
Yes.
But it's really challenging to say that when you've got somebody coming in for the first time, wondering like, how long is this going to take? When am I going to be better?
And they have a misconception of what relief looks like.
Right.
A lot of times they come in and they're saying, "Hey, I've been found out, but I'm going to white knuckle it. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm done." We'll see different accountability partner, or they'll put Covenant Eyes or something on their phone, and they feel like, all right, I can do this, and then. Right. They get to one of those hurdles and they get tripped up and they're right back to where they started. And so that roadmap, like I was, we zoom out and we say like, that anticipation, that an anticipatory investigation into this could be an issue. And during that time, that 6 months, we're beginning to heal other things. And that 3 years and that 5 years,
you're not always dealing with the same thing.
Right. It's amount of time. It's other relationship issues. It's childhood trauma. Like you have conversations with your father that you never had before, forgiving people that you never thought you were ever wounded by. And having somebody to walk through and be able to hold your hand through some of those things is so powerful, because it does seem daunting when you feel the full scope of it, or
it is daunting,
or even anticipate the full scope of it. Because a lot of times there's it's the iceberg where you see the 20% above water and there's a lot more underneath.
Almost always like that.
Yeah. So huge.
I just want to say white knuckling, like a definition of white knuckling, because I think we use some addiction language just generally, but we don't really know what we're talking about. So white knuckling is the idea that I can willpower through this. I can just not do it and I will be okay. And so some people can white knuckle for a little while. You can, choose to not do the action or the substance or whatever that you're addicted to. Some people can do that. Some people cannot do that, depending on the level of compulsivity. But white knuckling overall is not what we want for our people at FirstLight. What we want is for them to be at a place where they can see what's coming. They know that, okay, when this feeling comes up, I tend toward needing to do something to soothe myself. That might be looking at pornography. So instead of looking at pornography, I'm going to do this other thing.
How do you respond?
And you're doing things to replace the addiction, healthy things to replace the addiction. And you are learning about yourself. So you're not just sitting there every time waiting for that feeling to come and then holding on as long as possible. We don't want that. That's willpower, and that's not going to get you very far for the long run.
When we willpower alone, it's like putting our car together with duct tape.
Right.
Will it run? Maybe, but the second you hit a pothole or something you weren't anticipating, things fall apart, and you're right back to where you started. Probably worse.
Yes. So that's white knuckling, and it's not what we want to see from our folks.
No.
So,
sometimes it can help us abstain from that behavior long enough to get that clear mind. And so if that's what you have to do for a week or two, but we want to help get those aids and those tools in your tool belt.
Right.
To have conversations.
That's not our long-term
vision.
Right,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going on a road trip that way with the duct tape. And so we want to make sure that we can attune to all the little things. And yeah, that takes time.
It is time for questions and comments, the part of the episode where you can participate. Leave a comment for a chance for our experts to discuss it on a future episode. Today's question comes from somebody who attended a speaker event hosted by FirstLight Ministries. After 20 years of struggling with porn addiction, I was able to quit about 3 years ago. However, even though I stopped, my wife still treats me like I haven't made any progress. Why hasn't stopping porn helped my marriage? Shari and Matthew, take it away.
Often when I hear that kind of a statement, there's a couple of things I know are happening. Usually the spouse is not in therapy, or if she is, she's very closed off to her husband. And for good reason. That's for good reason. But very little repair is actually happening, or none is happening. And so my suggestion at that point would be to focus on repair. This from as a relationship issue. Secondly, though, if he's not doing anything aside from attending, clearly he's at a community group or something. He's doing something, but if he's not doing any work, I would say he needs to get himself back into therapy. He needs to do some hard work around this that she can see him doing, and then start asking questions about what it is that she needs and how he can support her. Because if he wants his relationship to get better, he's got to do something. She's not. And you can only be responsible for yourself. So he has to use his agency to fix things. He is not alone responsible to fix things, because he cannot. If she chooses to remain aloof and cut off from him, then he has to make a decision about whether he is going to stay in that relationship or not. But he has to be doing everything he can do to get the relationship where he wants it. And the first step is making sure he's doing the hard work he needs to be doing, and then talking with his wife about what he would like to see happen.
The first thing I hear in that question, yes to all that. I hear that he sees porn as the problem, and he seems to fix the problem. So when we start to unpack, what else have you done? What resources have you sought out? 99.9%, if not 100% of the time, porn is not the only problem.
Right.
It has not gone, skin deep. It's internal bleeding at this point. And so when you feel like, porn was the issue, I've stopped looking at porn, everything should be better now, right? Is just this fallacy that we've bought into. There's relational damage. Like we said, there could be, we're talking about childhood trauma that's going into this, both yours and perhaps your spouse's. And if we're not going to attune to everything that this pain and this wound and this betrayal is filtered through, then we haven't addressed the problem. You've stopped the behavior, so maybe no more, active infliction of pain or wounds, but you're still wounded. You still haven't repaired. You still haven't attuned to the thing that got you there, and you still haven't attuned to the wounds that happened while you were there. Yeah. And so that surface level idea of I was in porn and now I've stopped. What's the deal? I should be all better. You still need to go through the physical therapy, emotional therapy. You need to sit with somebody. You need to have somebody attuned to you and unpack this relational, disconnect. And it's a new paradigm shift. How do we be married now after this?
Right.
If you've been married 20 years and you've been dealing with porn for that whole time, and now you've been 3 years sober, that's great. I applaud you. But now what does it look like to be married? You guys need to learn how to be married again, and maybe for the first time.
And I would even add to that, I think that's a really great point. I would even add to that there is a concept that Alcoholics Anonymous uses, or that I've heard thrown around with alcoholism, which is dry drunk. Which is the idea that you can stop the behavior, the drinking, but you can still be behaving in the same ways that you were behaving. And the same is true with sex addiction. So you can stop the behavior, but you still might not be very pleasant to live with, or you still might be doing some of the things that hurt her in the first place. The pornography obviously hurt her, but relationally there's damage done there. And so you also need to be working on not just stopping the behavior, but going deeper to address the issues, which, we
have
both agree you would have to.
Safety? Have you attuned to the
what does she
betrayal,
actually need from you? Have you had those conversations? What does she say she needs from you?
A lot of times we destroy the trust, and we feel like once we've repaired the behavior, the trust comes back. Trust is just the foundation of the intimacy. We're looking at vulnerability, authenticity, genuineness. And then at the very top, once all those things have been attuned to and cared for, then we get to intimacy. And intimacy isn't always physical. It's not always sexual. Intimacy is just this beautiful gift that you have in relationship with somebody close to you. And that's all been torn apart. So we're rebuilding beyond just trust. You can trust me that I'm not looking at porn anymore.
Well, and the absence of a behavior, though, is not
the presence
building
of
blocks of trust. It's
so you have a lot of work to do.
One block of trust, perhaps, but it's not the only thing that goes into trust.
Yeah. There's a new relationship paradigm that you've shifted into, and you haven't attuned to yet.
This has been Saints and Sexuality. Please subscribe, comment, and share to support this podcast. FirstLight Ministries is a nonprofit funded by the generosity of our donors. If you would like to support FirstLight Ministries or host a FirstLight speaker at your church, visit www.firstlightstlouis.org.